And let's get kicked off. Welcome to Policy Exchange. My name is Eddie Copeland. I'm the head of the Technology Policy Unit here. Delighted to see so many people interested in today's theme. How can government support the development of tech clusters beyond the M25? And now this is a topic that here at Policy Exchange we care about quite a lot. It may not have escaped your attention. I hope it hasn't at least. There are reports lying around the room. A recent one which I co-authored with my colleague Cameron Scott, who's standing at the back, called Silicon Cities, which looked at exactly this theme. In case any of you feel minded to tweet about today, the hashtag we're encouraging you to use would be Silicon Cities. I've just sent out a tweet with the Twitter handles of our guest speakers today. Can I just start with a few words of thanks, firstly to my unit's sponsoring partners, that's Fujitsu, and also to the two sponsors in particular who've been focused with this report and made today's event possible. That's the British Venture Capital Association, BVCA, and the Computer and Communications Industry Association, CCIA. Both have enormous expertise in this particular area. I'm delighted to say that two representatives from those organisations will be speaking on a panel very shortly. Before I introduce our speakers, though, just a few very brief comments on the theme that we're discussing today. It won't have escaped anyone's attention in this room that technology is an ever-growing part of the UK economy. And George Osborne stood up, I think it was March 2012, at the opening of Google Campus and said he wanted the UK to be the tech centre of Europe, and that the technology industry should be bringing prosperity, new jobs, growth to every corner of the UK. And we took him at his word, and that's why we wrote our report. But the fact is that the technology sector, technology companies, technology jobs are still today heavily concentrated in the great city here in London, in the wider South East, and places like Cambridgeshire. The question, therefore, is what, if anything, can government do to support the growth of clusters further beyond the South East? Is the vision to bring prosperity to all corners of the country even a realistic one? And how do you balance what government does, what the public sector does, with the need for the private sector to lead and ultimately shape their own clusters? Well, today I'm delighted to be able to welcome a very expert panel to explore those questions. In terms of our format, for the first 40 minutes, I'm very pleased to be starting with a keynote and a Q&A with a man who I suspect will need very little introduction for this particular audience, Ed Vaizey MP, Minister of State for Culture and the Digital Economy, whose job it is, I think, to grapple for real with some of the issues that it's my privilege to be able to theorise about without actually having to put spade to the ground, as it were. Shortly after that, I will then be inviting our panel to the stage, which will involve Sherry Kutu, Gerard Grech, James Clark and James Waterworth. I'll do proper introductions for them in just a moment, but for now, Ed, we very much look forward to hearing what you have to say. Please give a round of applause.
Thanks very much. It's wonderful to be back at Policy Exchange. Wasn't sure what time I was going to speak because the former chairman of Policy Exchange, now the chief whip, kept messing us about with whether it was a one-line whip or a three-line whip. But anyway, that's all been sorted out just so that I can speak to you on time. And thank you to all the sponsors who have made this report happen and also supported this unit at Policy Exchange. You're obviously going to hear from people who know what they're talking about on the panel, but I'm going to set out the government's stall in this address. We do, when we talk about tech clusters, we tend to focus on Tech City, which has become the international powerhouse in technology that we know and love. In 2013, around 94,000, and it says here, Czech technology and digital enterprises were based in London, which I think means check that figure, rather than 94,000 companies from the Czech Republic. But Gerard will tell you the official figure. He'll have much more up-to-date figures. Anyway, around 100,000, let's call it that, technology and digital enterprises based in London, 20% more than 4 years ago. Google opening its new campus in King's Cross and other big tech companies basing themselves there So this is a success story that's going to run and run. And London receives the lion's share of the media coverage. And it is important, I think, to emphasise that there is a benefit to that, because I think Tech City, as I say in many of my remarks, acts as a beacon for international investors all around the world to say not just London, but the UK is interested in technology and wants technology investment and wants to encourage technology companies in the UK. But it is also important, as this report emphasises, to remind ourselves that there are tech clusters all over the UK. And I want to use this address just to talk about some of the work we are doing. But we all know where we can find these tech clusters. Cambridge, obviously, Oxford, near my own constituency. Leeds, with a strong cluster in health data and in fintech. Edinburgh, strong in artificial intelligence. Brighton, in both tech and the creative industries. Media City in Salford. Dundee, of course, a home of the games industry. Startup hubs in Bristol and Bournemouth. Leamington Spa, although not officially part of the Tech Cluster Alliance. And also creative clusters growing around some of the major film studios like Pinewood and Elstree. So these clusters are contributing to economic growth right across the country. And as I alluded earlier, a good illustration of this is the video games industry in the UK, which is in the spotlight with new analysis from Ukey and Nesta. So we are working with the creative industries to better understand these clusters and their supply chains and how best to support them, to make them even more attractive to inward investors, but also to increase the opportunities for exports as well. It's also important, as part of my new responsibilities, they include cyber security, and it's important to focus on that. I think as part of the tech story, and in the Malvern area, we have a thriving cluster of small businesses focused on cyber security. It doesn't take a genius to work out why it's located in that area, and government is working with industry through the Cyber Growth Partnership to build on this, including engaging the manager of the Malvern cluster, Emma Philpott, to use her expertise to facilitate the growth of cyber clusters in other parts of the UK. So, in recognition of the importance we place on tech clusters in general, we've provided financial support to help Tech City UK. Tech City UK was created in January 2014, but to help make the UK the best place to start and grow a business. And it's developed a number of programs to support tech clusters. The first, of course, is the Tech Cluster Alliance. That's 13 tech clusters ranging from Edinburgh and Glasgow to Bristol and Brighton, Belfast, Cardiff, London. The Alliance allows clusters to share their knowledge, their expertise, their best practice, and also, importantly, it acts as a voice for those within the clusters to provide intelligence and recommendations to government. And I think it is important to stress that there is a sort of continuous feedback loop going on here. We in government and policymakers are very keen to hear from people on the ground, to hear specific suggestions as to how we can make their life easier. The Alliance also arranges events for regional tech clusters to highlight to potential investors and other interested parties the strengths of the clusters and the capabilities of companies within them. We also have the Digital Business Academy. That's going to be an online learning tool giving individuals the knowledge, skills and confidence to start up or grow a digital company. And the first courses are going to be available in November 2014, and pre-registration for those who are interested is now open. Your report, Policy Exchange report, does highlight the need to map the UK tech clusters, and we agree with you on that. So we've supported Tech City UK, and we commissioned 6 months ago a report to map the location and capabilities of technology companies and clusters throughout the UK. An online tool will also provide the ability to interrogate the attributes of each cluster. And this report and mapping tool will be used to attract investment and will particularly benefit clusters outside London, where information on strength and capabilities is less well known internationally. And the first report is due out at the next month. It's also important to talk about my role in rolling out superfast broadband. I'm slightly broadbanded out over the last couple of days with endless debates, questions, television appearances on broadband, taking flack from people who feel that they're being left behind. I want to emphasise that we don't want to leave anyone behind, but this is a major engineering project, and if I could wave a magic wand and deliver superfast broadband tomorrow morning, believe me, I would. but we are going as fast as we can. We've passed more than 1 million premises. We're going to pass another key milestone shortly. We are passing almost 50,000 premises a week now, so we are well on target to achieve 95% of UK premises having access to superfast broadband by 2017. In addition to that, in recognition that it's not all about rural broadband, but it is also about cities, we have our Super Connected Cities programme working with 22 cities with a connection voucher scheme as well as wireless projects in city centres. And I'm pleased that something like 4,000 small businesses have now made use of that programme. We've stepped it up a few gears as well with a publicity campaign to increase awareness, and take-up has increased by 500% since March this year, and we've also made the scheme much less bureaucratic in terms of getting access to the vouchers. We've signed up almost 600 suppliers to provide services as well. So this isn't just about broadband, but it's also about the physical infrastructure, the physical digital infrastructure, if you like. And we, as a government, are working on a long-term strategy to deliver future digital communications infrastructure. We do spend billions of pounds on digital networks, on fibre, on masts. And actually, for the first time, we, as a government, are looking across the piece at what projects we have underway, how we're buying them, how we're interconnecting them, if you like. Are we making the most of these assets? Think about the fibre that runs along the roads, fibre that's used in the rail network, the fibre that's used to connect up health services, the fibre that's used by the emergency services. All of these have hitherto existed in their own silos. So we need to ask questions. Do we need all of that connectivity? Would it be better if we could join it together? Would we get economies of scale? Would we get faster rollout? In terms of mobile coverage, can we also think laterally and say, well, government has a vast estate. Mobile companies are always moaning about the cost of putting up masts and getting access to land. If they had a benign landlord in government willing to make their estate available for masts, would that make a difference? So we've put that offer out to the mobile companies. So we've established the Digital Task Force. It's chaired by Francis Maud, and the vice chairs are myself and Joe Swinson. And just in a matter of months, it has made a really significant impact. And I think it's one of the most important interventions we've made in recent years in terms of digital infrastructure. So we've established the Telecommunications and Digital Infrastructure Portfolio Board underneath the Digital Task Force, and that brings together all, as it were, the heads of each project to meet on a regular basis to look at where they can work together and increase efficiency. Moving on, again, given that this theme is about getting tech clusters outside of London, the Chancellor set out the government's vision for Britain's great northern cities to be transformed into a northern powerhouse of Britain's economy. And David Higgins, the chairman of HS2, has been asked to produce a report for the Chancellor, a comprehensive plan for connecting the great northern cities, particularly to improve journey times east and west, and also to speed up the opening of HS2. And a key part of the policy exchange report we're discussing today highlights the benefits of creating a super tech cluster in the north, covering Manchester, Leeds and the Sheffield clusters, as well as Liverpool. We're considering the merits of supporting this super cluster, and of course there has to be a clear appetite from the clusters themselves to join up before we can work out the best way to support them. I think at the heart of any tech cluster as well lies research and innovation. The creation and exploitation of new knowledge ideas drives long-term growth, and the exchange of ideas created through research enables innovation in new products and services to be developed and brought to market. So we will also shortly be publishing a science and innovation strategy which will set out how we're going to deliver the research and innovation we need to keep the UK's companies world leading. Clusters, of course, don't just rely on government, they are industry-led, and we want to work with think tanks, with industry, with Tech City UK, to ensure that the UK's business environment is the best that it can be to encourage the creation of tech clusters, to help us fulfil our ambition to be the best place in the world to start and grow a tech business. Another example of regional innovation we're supporting are the University Enterprise Zone pilots. Bradford and the Leeds City region, led by the University of Bradford, is the University Enterprise Zone that will pilot the Digital Health Zone, aiming to be the best place in the UK to innovate and grow businesses in communications-enabled healthcare. In Liverpool, both the University of Liverpool and Liverpool John Moores University, as well as the City Region LEP and the City Council, have worked to create a University Enterprise Zone in sensor technologies. And that has a clear technology focus to develop and implement novel sensor systems that integrate sensors, firmware programming and advanced algorithms. Innovate UK, what you will all know as the Technology Strategy Board, also looks for innovative ideas and projects which have the greatest potential. It has a UK-wide remit. One of its programmes is the Launchpad, which encourages clusters of ambitious high-tech SMEs to develop and grow. A good example of that is the Greater Manchester Creative and Digital Launchpad, which is providing up to £1 million in funding for innovative projects to stimulate the development of the emerging cluster of creative and digital businesses in and around Greater Manchester. So I hope you all agree that there are a series of measures that the government is taking to encourage tech clusters to develop and thrive, not just in London, but outside London. I think one of the strengths of the digital and creative industries is that it is regionally based, that you can go to almost any city in the UK and find a significant cluster. And the challenge for government, as I said earlier, is to work with industry, to work with think tanks, to work with Tech City to identify these clusters and to give both general and bespoke help where we can in order for them to thrive. Thank you very much.
I'll open it up to the audience in just one moment. First of all, if I could just start with a question. You've mentioned the Northern Powerhouse theme. We've heard George Osborne talk about that as well. You've mentioned that that would consist of transport, certainly, potentially digital infrastructure. Beyond those things, what would a Northern Powerhouse look like? What would that entail from government side?
Well, I think the point that George is making, and it's an obvious point, is you want to keep, obviously, local identities. Liverpool, Manchester have their own identities. There's even a clear difference between Manchester and Salford. You will know if you go to visit Salford and other cities like Sheffield. But also, there is a recognition that by joining together in terms of programmes, both in terms of much better transport links, but also in terms of, as it were, a general offer to investors, or in terms of communicating the kind of opportunities that exist in these wonderful cities, you will probably get more impact. So it has to be an alliance, in the sense it has to be something that those cities want to create and see the opportunities for, as well as, and that then translates into government being able to help. So in terms of clusters, there is a clear opportunity, it seems to me, to identify a northern cluster that consists of a series of clusters, but combined together provides a very compelling offer and a whole range of different opportunities.
Thank you very much. Over to the room. If anyone would like to ask questions, please, brief comments, brief questions, and if you could mention your name and the organisation. Gentleman right at the back.
Hi, Culver Ranger. I think Ed will know me. I set up the digital office for the Mayor in 2011, currently chair the Digital City Exchange Board at Imperial Business School, and also sit on the board of Bristol 2015, which will be the European Green Capital. Great set of initiatives around the country the Minister's laid out. But one of the things that I found might not be in that group, or you may not have mentioned, is where tech meets sustainability. One of the things I did in London when I had the environmental portfolio and the technology portfolios combine those things. So we can deliver new initiatives around sustainability, whether that be energy-related, air quality-related, but all relating to quality of life, by harnessing the power of some of the innovation that's going on in technology. I'm seeking to put that into the programme in Bristol for next year, and if that's not on your agenda at the moment, I'd really like to put it there. So that's the question.
Well, I think point well made by Kulveer, and I think that, for example, if you take the Future Cities Catapult, who I met yesterday, sustainability is very much on their agenda. Clearly, technology, the Internet of Things, smart cities, whatever you want to call it, City Check, I think Microsoft call it, is a lot of it will be about sustainability in the environment, smarter traffic management, for example, smarter rubbish collection. There's a whole host of different ways you can look at sustainability and environmental impact. So I think within your question as well, there are two challenges. One is government to continue to coordinate and focus. What we don't want are too many different organisations going off, ploughing their own furrow. It's really important that all the different organisations that have skin in this game do talk to each other and coordinate what they're doing. And the second challenge, I think, is focus, because one of the great things, obviously, about technology, and this will sound immensely trite, it probably is immensely trite, is that the possibilities are endless. And I think another challenge for government and indeed all those stakeholders is to keep a relentless focus. But I think sustainability should be one of the key focuses that we look at.
Okay, someone else. So, gentleman just in front, and then we'll come to the lady just in front of him.
Shane Mitchell from Urban Peer Limited. Now, I guess I spent a career advocating symmetrical fibred broadband, so rather than the more loose term of super fast, whatever that means. But I want to contradict myself and my advocacy of that to say that actually what we found down on the South Coast in trying to get a small cluster in a small town is actually there's the skills gap. You didn't mention education and the skills gap that employers, digital businesses are finding the issues with currently.
Well, I think, again, I'll turn your question into two questions. First of all, in terms of business networks like Wired Sussex, I want to get a greater handle on those. I think we were approached recently by one in Manchester as well. I think as well as having a tech cluster alliance, we should be looking at having a digital business network alliance, if you like. I'm sure we can find an easier way of putting that. But places like with Wired Sussex and other digital networks around the country, I think we need to kind of find out where they are and bring them together on a more regular basis. So that would be a very good thing. It may you look like you're about to intervene and tell me that that's already happening and what am I on about? But you can fill me in on that. And the second point about skills, yes, I could have given an entire speech about skills, an entire address about skills. We are focusing on skills relentlessly. I think that there are a number of points to make. One is, again, mapping for me is very, very important. I don't think we spend enough time pulling together information and getting an overview. So now we are much better now at looking at where courses are in terms of FE and HE, and also understanding which courses are delivering jobs, who is leaving those courses and going into work, and who is leaving those courses and not getting jobs because they haven't been given the skills that actually employers need. The second thing I think we need to look at, and to a certain extent the Digital Business Academy was an allusion to that, is different ways of giving people opportunities to learn skills. And we need to look at apprenticeships, we need to look at short courses, we need to look at porous courses so that when you go to university you have a relationship with employers, which is an active relationship which is informing your education, not work experience. And we will be making a series of announcements on those, I hope, with a following wind in the next few months.
It was lady just in the middle row.
Anna Solar-Bassett from the Local Government Association. Just with your comments about the fact that most of these clusters are focused regionally and with the conversations at the moment around devolution, has the national government given any thought to how to further devolve power to local councils to ensure that they can deliver skills, resources, support to small businesses, particularly in this sector? Thanks.
Well, that's a massive question. And to a certain extent, it's the kind of question that an organisation like Policy Exchange is well placed to wrestle with, and I'm sure you may well have
published. An extra report.
Exactly. Because it covers such a huge range of different opportunities. But clearly, if I was to answer that question in terms of kind of high-level principles, it seems to me that one of the big political debates in the next few years is about the devolution of power, not just to nations, but to regions and to cities. and about leadership at the local level and the best way to effect dynamic leadership that could take that forward. Because my sympathies are with what I think lay behind your question, that we do need to make real progress in giving much more power to cities and regions. It's something that Greg Clark, as the Cities Minister, I think is focused on, and I think it is a very live debate because, people see what huge opportunities there are.
Okay, other question. Gentleman just in front, and then we'll go to the gentleman in the purple jumper in front.
Lee Titcombe, Point to Protect. I'm an entrepreneur with a tech startup in your constituency, Mr. Vaizey. We're very much looking forward to you visiting our offices and finding out more about us. I've just lost my tech startup. After 25 years of developing and nurturing businesses, I've committed to developing a unique new online safety service for the UK, which I happen to believe passionately in. We're working with the Safe Internet Centre to help parents and schools cope with a world where children are accessing the internet anywhere and any time. My question today is how a small startup like ours breaks into new markets when the product and service is ready to go. As I'm sure is the case with other public sector markets, e-safety practices are already entrenched and the education market is highly complex and diverse. Similarly, we have to operate at the level of the big players, like the ISPs, to reach parents. How can smaller startups like ours find a clear route to market now?
Well, I am very much looking forward to visiting your company. I think you emailed me a couple of weeks ago, and it's a nice combination of you being based in my constituency, so I am your MP, but also working in an area in which I have a stake as a minister, which is the protection of children online. We've worked with ISPs, as you know, to introduce filters on a voluntary basis. Lots of myths around those filters, but frankly, they are a good thing. And they will allow parents to put in some protections for their children. They're not perfect, but they're a work in progress, and they will get better as time goes along. In terms of your question, I think the high-level question is how does a small business become a supplier, either to government or to big business, if you like. Government is very focused on getting small businesses to supply services. And the government digital service in particular is almost evangelical about this. And Liam Maxwell, the Chief Technology Officer, his favourite slide, his favourite map is a map of the UK showing the original kind of IT suppliers to government, 4 big blobs on the map, and now showing the IT suppliers to government, which is 500 dots all over the map. That is not to say that some of the big companies that we've worked with in the past and continue to work with are not providing a very valuable service to government, but we have, I think, very genuinely redressed the balance in giving small businesses an opportunity to work with government by making it simpler in terms of the tendering process and actively going out and proselytising about the need to supply government. Because it's not just because it's a nice thing to do for small businesses, but because, again, with the whole kind of tech the whole thing about tech is about innovation, and you are going to get a lot of innovation very quickly from small tech businesses. I can't speak for big businesses, say the ISPs, in terms of their procurement processes and how they will work in terms of engaging a small business. Clearly, they are customer-facing, and they want to ensure that anything they put in front of their customers, works and is effective. But obviously, as you are in my constituency, I'm very happy to effect any introductions you should need. And that goes to anyone else who wants to move and set up a business in my constituency.
The next thriving tech cluster. Good. So, gentleman in the purple jumper.
Hi, Jimmy McLaughlin from the Institute of Directors. It's a slight extension of the local government question. In terms of possibly getting cities and tech clusters to go against each other. But actually, when you look at Silicon Valley as an example, it takes 2 hours to get from Silicon Valley to San Francisco. So how much can the UK actually, the whole of the UK, be an entire Silicon Valley itself rather than just looking at tech clusters?
Well, I think, first of all, because we have such a brilliant transport secretary in the UK, transport in the UK is much, much better than it is on the West Coast. So I think that's the first point to make. But the second point is, if that remark gets back to him in any shape or form, that'll be good for me in my career. The second point is I completely agree with you in the sense that, there was this question, how do we create Silicon Valley in the UK? Well, I think we do have Silicon Valley in the UK if you take, those of us who've been Silicon Valley, and particularly people who've worked there for many years, know that Silicon Valley is not just a sort of, the size of Westminster, everyone's wandering into everyone's front door. So if you take the South East, which I'm sure we shouldn't, considering we're talking about outside the M25, Silicon Valley for me is London, Oxford and Cambridge. And we've talked about the Northern Powerhouse, the links between the cities in the north. So yes, I take the premise of your question that the UK can be Silicon Valley, and we shouldn't be, the point about tech clusters is it doesn't matter if you're in Dundee, Manchester, London, the links are still perfectly possible. What I'm trying to say in an incredibly tortuous fashion is it's not simply about geography, it's about connectivity and links like the Tech Cluster Alliance.
Okay. I think was the gentleman in front had a question? Yeah. So the mic will come to you.
Hi, Andrew Teacher. I'm the Policy Director for SpaceHive, a civic crowdfunding platform, and a Director of Blackstock, a PR firm. We put out a report last year with Growth Intelligence, a startup, which measured the digital economy, and they kind of, it was done in collusion with Google, and it brought up some quite interesting, sort of relating to what you were saying about a map coming out soon. And I guess the takeaway of that was that digital companies aren't simply tech firms and software companies, but in effect, anything from an architect's firm which 50 years ago would have used pads and pencils, which now maybe uses CAD, or an engineering firm which is obviously now running lots of automated systems. And I guess the point being that when we think of digital companies or tech companies or whatever phrase you use, there's an inference behind the almost being seen as a different sort of company, but actually in reality, most companies, whether they're a PR firm or an engineering company, is in some way now a tech company. And I think there's probably value in thinking of things that way. The question I was going to ask really was, to what degree on a government, on a policy level, there is sufficient joined-up thinking between the great stuff that you guys are doing with things across planning and development, where you've got obviously cities like Manchester that are being properly regenerated right across the board, Airport City and Noma and all these sorts of things that clearly provide excellent opportunities to build in the physical infrastructure you need. How is that all being lined up to ensure that we're properly taking the opportunities as best we can?
Well, I agree with you that every company is a tech company. People tend to think you're only a tech company if you've got a ping pong table and a beanbag in your office, but actually a lot of other companies are tech companies. And we try, and on a lot of our kind of boards and tech policy, to include the digital directors and IT directors of big companies, supermarkets and so on that are using tech in just as innovative ways as any pure tech company. So I think in answer to your first question, as it were, yes, the government does talk to a range of different industries where tech is at the heart of their rejuvenation, renewal, if you like. In terms of planning, again, I think that is why we have a Future Cities Catapult to try and work with cities, and we have demonstrator cities like Glasgow and Milton Keynes, putting in tech networks in terms of supporting the development of the city of the future, if you like. So I think, in terms of your question, that is the answer. That it's, we've got a Future Cities Catapult. We are very aware that tech will shape the development of cities as much as it shapes the development of businesses.
We've got time for one.
I can't remember which city. Is it Coventry that's going to have the driverless cars next year? I thought it was Coventry. People tell me different things. Oh, okay. And then drive themselves to Milton Keynes.
As long as that's where they were meant to go.
So long as it's a straight line.
Gentleman just here, yeah.
I'm Nicholas Lansman. I run a company called Political Intelligence, which is an agency that specialises in the tech sector and the public affairs field. My question is about the EU. I noticed in the report, which I've briefly read, and I'm sure the Minister's had time to digest, there's a couple of references to the importance of the EU. And I find it quite interesting. I look at tech sector from across the EU, and there's a number of references to issues to do with access to skills and to directives that are coming out of the European Union. How would this impact on the government's policy on whether we should stay in or out of the EU?
Well, that's a helpful question. I have enjoyed a good working relationship with Nellie Cruz, the effectively digital commissioner. She came to see us this week and made the point, which I think is true again, that to replace her, we needed 3 men. So 3 commissioners are now going to do the work of 1 woman, which is a general principle across the board. What I like about Europe, and I think, within your question, you're right. There's going to be a big debate about the UK's place in Europe over the next 3 years, and that has to be a two-way debate with us as a government saying our concerns about the way Europe operates and where we feel it overreaches itself. But I think there is also a debate, and it will perhaps come from the Union itself, but it could come from people who are pro being in Europe, in the UK, about the benefits of being a member of the European Union. Some of those benefits, a lot of those benefits do potentially stem from tech, because the next great agenda for Europe is the digital single market. Now, there are a number of points within that. So one is about building digital networks and broadband, which the EU should be encouraging. Better coordination of spectrum, which again is a big potential prize. There are threats, data protection. I have a new line, which is that I regard the revision of the Data Protection Directive as potentially the most important economic regulation being considered by Europe. If they get that right, that will be a huge prize for digital businesses. If they get it wrong, it will be a big albatross around the neck of European digital businesses. So that is something that we need to look very carefully at. But from where I'm standing, for the tech industry, being part of the European Union is a good thing. We have a lot of broadcasters based here because of European Union rules. We have access to talent that a lot of tech companies need. We have a lot of tech companies in Europe moving here in order to scale up. But there will be a debate, but it is important to remember that there are some advantages as well, and a lot of those are in tech. Other things for the consumers, like the reduction in roaming charges around Europe, for example, will be another kind of real tangible benefit that we will see.
Pleased to finish on an easy question for you, but thank you so much for giving up your time, letting us know more about the government's plans and to responding to questions. We're glad to have given you a break from broadband, but for now, can we please give a round of applause, Ed Vaizey. Shall I take this? Perfect.
Just in case I say something stupid on the way.
Right, I invite the rest of our panel to come join me up on the stage. So we go, quick mic swap. No preference, wherever you like. I will sit here, why not? Okay, so please do come grab a seat. So delighted to welcome, following the Minister's speech, our expert panel. Really formidable bunch of people who've got expertise in very, very different aspects of this question. So I'm looking forward to hearing their comments and giving you the chance to ask some questions. We'll have Sherry Kutu. Sherry, one of the country's most successful and influential entrepreneurs, angel investors and business mentors. She chairs Silicon Valley Comes to the UK, Founders for Schools, and was awarded a CBE for services to entrepreneurship last year. Sherry, I believe, will be publishing your own report next month on scale-ups. Interested to hear more about this, so please do look out for that report next month. Gerard Grech, I'm sure, will also be familiar to many of you, CEO of Tech City UK, the publicly funded body that works to accelerate the growth of digital businesses in cities, in clusters right around the UK. I'm sure Gerard will be able to give us a fairly unique perspective on government's role with supporting private sector initiatives, but feel free to say whatever you may wish. James Clark, we have from the British Venture Capital Association, BVCA, really actually kind of put this question on the map for the first time with his report, Tech Country. And not least of the achievements of that report was highlighting the presence of clusters that a lot of people hadn't even heard of. I think not least the F1 cluster, the Midlands Motorsport cluster. If you haven't heard of it, look it up. Incredible things going on there which don't necessarily match onto your usual view of what a cluster has to look like. Finally, last but not least, it's my pleasure to welcome James Waterworth from the CCIA, Vice President of Europe there, where he advises members and also policymakers on a wide range of issues from intellectual property, international trade and internet regulation, a long background in the tech sector itself. I think it was interesting that last question we heard. Clearly, one of the things that we were keen to emphasise in our report, and I'm sure James will be able to add to, is we have this context that tech clusters are competing with London all the time. It's not just that, they're competing in an international environment. Right around the world, including in Europe, we have clusters growing all the time. They'll be providing cooperation, but also competition. How the UK chooses to respond, I think, is a real challenge for policymakers, particularly given the current state of the debate over the future of our membership in the EU. With that, I will now hand over. Can I start with Sherry? Round of applause. Yeah, do you want to?
Thank you. Whenever I think of you, I think of the school where I first met you.
I've known Sherry for a little while, in different professions.
So you went from the education profession into the policy profession, but I don't know if you know the Apathon that we're running right now for kids was focused on and came out of one of the events at your old school, and it thrills me to think that every single child in the whole UK is currently incentivized to use the model that you created. So well done, new
Pleased
pastors.
to hear.
So I think there were a number of questions, and I'm just going to wander around for a couple of minutes and sort of do a stream of consciousness. And the first was, what should the vision be for UK tech clusters? And I like your allusion to the F1 cluster. And I think we should think about what exactly a cluster is, and I think we'll have that discussion. Is it a city? Are there 31 of them, or are there 39 of them, or are there some agglomerations of them? I studied underneath Michael Porter at Harvard Business School when I studied there, and I think that's a really good question for us to think about. I think it does have to do with a natural ecosystem and relationships between people and between talent. So I think seeing what emerges for the geography. We recently, the hat I just put on was Silicon Valley Comes to the UK, and by the way, Silicon Valley, to my mind, is a state of mind. It's not a place. And as a Canadian, this is a very small island, and you can get pretty much anywhere really quite quickly. So I think we should bear that in mind, and that's how I view our world. But we did a mapping on the maps are always good. We started out 3 years just mapping the Cambridge cluster, and we wanted to investigate the 1,500 companies that were there and see what were growing, which ones were growing, which ones were shrinking, which ones were growing the fastest. Then we thought, well, on the country basis, we know that science and IP is really, really important. So how fast are those companies growing? So we did a map of the top 175 fastest growing science-based companies, and to our surprise, they were growing at an average rate of 92% per annum. And in a single year, their revenues increased from 686 million to 1.3 billion. So that speaks to the power of IP. And I know that Ed was talking about digital creative, and we should speak a lot about digital, but the science-based companies are really, really important, and they are growing very, very fast. When we plotted on a map where those 175 companies were, they were definitely not just around London, Oxford, and Cambridge. There were some amazing chemistry and oil ones up in Aberdeen. So again, the clusters themselves, you found the skills and the talent emerging from around the country. And to me, it was fascinating seeing where they were, and a little bit gratifying to see that they weren't all in London. And so I was very pleased with the subject of what we're talking about today. The second question is, what can be done to help? Well, if we think about the pains or the barriers that one goes through on the journey from startup to scaling up. So you start with an idea in one person, and then you hire 5, then you hire another 10, then it works. Before you know it, you've got 50 employees, and you have to start putting processes in at 50 employees. And then you jump from 50 employees to 250 employees, and you go through different learning processes as a business leader. And you have to hire different individuals to be around you. And then you get up to the 500, the 500 sort of employees, and to the 1,000 of employees. And there are a number of companies in the UK that are growing right now from 500 to 1,000 employees, growing very fast. And the great thing is that as businesses go through these different stages of 0 to 50, 50 to 100, 100 to 500 employees, they go through they need similar tools. So it's almost like a diagnosis and a treatment, and you can treat them. And in no particular order, because next month when my report comes out, there is a particular order, but I'm not putting it in order right now. These companies sometimes need finance. It's often the earliest stage ones. The most important thing for the earliest stage is finance. But when you get up to growing from 500 to 1,000, that's not the most important. Something asked in several of the questions earlier, skills. Access to skills is very, very important. And the leadership skills, what kind of processes do you need for that, to expand up to 50? When you hit 50, you often go through a transition. When you get your product working in one country, and we're actually a small country here, if you want to access the 500 million people across Europe, that's sort of exports. Well, what do you need to do exports? That's not rocket science. It's been done by a number of people, and you can teach people how to do that quite easily, assuming you can identify them. So exports are important for us growing and scaling our businesses. Education is absolutely critical, making sure that the skills gap that was identified by the Royal Society of more than 1 million STEM jobs that they anticipate being open and not filled in the next 10 years will be a key one for us to address. And if we don't address it, we'll be in big trouble, actually, I think. I'd rather address that issue and make sure that we can continue to be the magnet for every single scale-up in Europe, if not the globe. There was a question about the role of government versus private. I think that's kind of a weird question because it's our ecosystem, it's our economy, and we all work together and we have to collaborate together. And the benefits of collaboration, if you look at the cost of producing a job, for instance, going it alone, it costs something like £30,000 to create an extra job. In a collaborative fashion, the evidence that is around suggests that it's between £400 and £1,700 to create an additional job if government is collaborating with academia and business. So to me, with the scarcity of skills and resources, we should definitely be collaborating more with one another because at the end of the day, we're all in the same, we're all here in the same sort of pot. I think the government is amazing at using its convening power and also its monitoring power. So bringing people together so that we can together solve problems that are a high priority is, I think, something that we should all do. And I would look to the government to pull together different businesses or universities and schools to sort out some things that need to be sorted out. Digital creative, science, advanced manufacturing, again, looking at the different clusters, there's some amazing pockets of genius all over the place, and I think we need to find out where that is. One of your questions was which cities. I don't want to pick cities. I would rather see what was emerging on a real-time basis from the different cities and then help them do whatever it is that they're already doing, and seeing if we can breathe some gusts of wind into their sails rather than picking or preordaining anything. I'm reminded of the 100% of net new jobs that are created across Europe come from companies that are less than 5 years old. If that's the case, we are in a hyper dynamic economy, and for that we need to be watching closely to see where the sparks of genius are and make sure that we can all help and work together to help whatever it's coming out, whether or not it's an F1 cluster or a ceramic cluster or semiconductors or whatever it happens to be. Let's spot it and then work together to bring it up. But anyway, I think that's what I have to say. But again, I don't think Silicon Valley is a place; it's a state of mind. And it's going to be fun working together to make sure that I think it's the globe, actually. I would prefer that everybody here wanted to come and scale up their company here, not just from Europe. My ambition is that they relocate here from China and from the US, because this will be and should be the best place to scale a company in the entire planet, not just Europe. But that's just my crazy entrepreneur hat talking. Can't stop it. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you very much. We're definitely not modest in our ambitions, but no, we certainly like it that way at Policy Exchange, so thank you very much, Sherry. Gerard.
Right. Yes. Thanks. Thank you to Policy Exchange, thank you to the sponsors, and thank you to Ed Vaizey for the introductory speech. I'll just say a few words, just three things. One is the drivers to formation and growth of a cluster, a tech cluster. Tech City UK's role and purpose in that. And then number three, some of the challenges that I'm seeing. Really quickly, I guess to say that the future of any nation is creativity, as far as a lot of people are concerned. And that means innovation. You need to continue growing. You need to continue adapting. It's not about the strongest. It's about the country that can adapt the most. And to that point, we're clearly seeing technology be quite transformative in many ways. I think this was picked out earlier from the audience about how technology is crossing over into other industries, be it education, transportation, housing. It's crossing over. And I think London has already become known as the fintech capital of Europe, if not the world, in fact, because you have a critical mass of expertise in financial services, and now a critical mass of expertise in technology that crosses over into financial services, which brings us to the world of fintech. And don't take my word for it. I mean, there are publications published in the US that state that there are more people working in fintech in Greater London than there are in New York or Silicon Valley. So, as I said, the future of any nation is creative. It's innovation. It's forward-looking, being able to embrace the change that's coming. So what about the four drivers to formation and growth of a tech cluster? I'll just quickly go through them. One is intellectual, i.e. the skills, the talent, the universities, the assets that the city actually has. And every city is unique. Every city has its own DNA. London has its own DNA. Manchester has a huge history, starting many centuries ago, but clearly having had a big role to play in the Industrial Revolution. And there's a legacy from that. Sheffield is not too far from the M1 and the M62, and because of that, there's a critical mass of expertise in logistics and international distribution centers that is nowhere near anywhere else in this country. That is an asset. Now, if you cross that over with other digital technologies and technology in general, you could become known as the epicenter of innovation for logistics and international distribution, if you put your mind to it. So it's intellectual, it's political leadership, it is social leadership as well. So it's intellectual. Number two is social. It has to come from the community. It's not about government stating X, Y, Z. It has to come from the community. There needs to be local leadership, addressing the needs, identifying the needs, but informing policymakers locally as well as at national level. Number three, infrastructure. no surprise, clearly, property, broadband, transportation, and the links to other cities. That's a critical success factor. Number 4 is finance, as Sherry pointed out. It's not just about seed capital. It's about growth capital and being able to allow that company to take an idea into concept, into a formation of a company, into a fast-growing company, and hopefully list here on the London Stock Exchange or get acquired. And obviously, cutting across those 4 drivers is policy, right? Policy and government have a role to play in the intellectual part, or the intellectual component of that, the social aspect, and listening, as Ed Vaizey was talking about, being able to listen to the grassroots, to being able to listen to entrepreneurs on the ground, to hear the challenges and needs being heard in national government and local government. Number 3, infrastructure, and number 4, finance. Tech City UK is all about, the second point quickly here, is about accelerating the growth of digital businesses in this country. And the way it's going about this is to put programs in place that address the needs and the challenges that we're hearing directly from entrepreneurs in order to grow their businesses. So ranging from the Cluster Alliance, where there's been a clear need from other cities to learn from other cities about what other cities are doing to grow their tech innovation. Obviously, a lot has happened in Shoreditch, a lot has happened in East London, but that's being shared with other cities through the Cluster Alliance program. Ed also alluded to our coming soon program called the Digital Business Academy, which is about making these skills, these digital skills that digital companies need, available through universities and other grassroots digital skills schools. So we're very much program-driven, but very much entrepreneur and ecosystem-driven. Those programs are very much led by the entrepreneurs. Number 2, we clearly provide an agile, fast-responding loop into national government. The introduction of the exceptional tech talent visa for digital was very much a good example of how Tech City UK heard very loudly and clearly from the community about migration, about the need to have specialists in digital technologies and capabilities, and the introduction of that visa route as a result. Because clearly, when you look at the population of the US, it's 350 million. When you look at the population of the UK, it's 64 million. When you look at the population of the EU, it's 500 million. So if you want to compete internationally, you need to be able to tap into a pool of talent that is comparable with other nations that are competing in being at the forefront of digital innovation. And number 3, obviously championing and identifying these clusters, championing the work they're doing, the innovation that they're driving at, and Ed obviously alluded to this earlier, artificial intelligence and critical mass of expertise around that topic in Edinburgh, critical mass of expertise in cybersecurity in Belfast, critical mass of expertise in robotics in Bristol. Cambridge just goes without saying, it's great at a lot of things. So, we do a lot of work in championing, increasingly, let's put it this way, from March of this year, in championing the growth of these cities and their respective areas of expertise, not only nationally, but internationally, because you need scale. In terms of challenges, I think I'll just mention one, which we perhaps can talk about. It's universities and making sure, and colleges of higher education and colleges of further education, and ensuring that they are providing these skills. And these skills are this industry in the digital tech sector, it's growing at quite a speed. And, we need to do everything we can to ensure that the colleges and the universities that are preparing our next generation are keeping up and that there's no time lag. And clearly, we welcome the fact that this government is introducing coding in schools, which will give school leavers, a far stronger grounding in technology. It's numeracy, yes. It's literacy, but it's also creativity. And I think coding allows people to be creative through logic. and I think that's a welcoming thing. But universities and colleges of further education need to also step up in that respect. I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Can I just ask one quick question before we move on? So I understand, Tech City UK supporting at least of 13 clusters around the UK. Given that you look across at the US, and we keep talking about Silicon Valley for a reason, and that tech clusters, successful tech clusters, are really rare. Even the USA only has a small handful of truly internationally renowned centres of technical expertise. Are we kidding ourselves if we think we can have a dozen tech clusters here in the UK, or frankly, can we expect us to have one or two?
So I'd like to, my vision is to ensure that we are putting together a network of digital excellence right across the country. It's not about one city versus the other. We do treat the journey to, let's say, Cambridge almost like a pilgrimage when it's not that far at all, right? And I think, yes, we can talk about cities, but I'd like to talk more about country being great at a number of digital capabilities, ranging from machine learning to computational simulation to artificial intelligence. You need a broad range of skills to be at the forefront of technology. It's not about just one area of expertise. So it's happening all over the country, and I'd like to make sure that we're doing everything we can to accelerate that collaboration between cities so that as a nation we're far stronger, and also to have that scale that we need in order to be at the forefront of innovation. That's all I'll say.
Do you want to jump in on that, Sherry?
As I make the pilgrimage, I can't even say that word. I come down from Cambridge every day, so it's not actually that far. But I think the point was, for me, I think of your map that I think you might be about to talk about. But for me, if it's an F1 person and you're in Shanghai, I think it's about identifying where the best place is for you to connect to internationally. So I think we should think about, well, wherever you are, trying to find an easy way for them to get to the best place that will be the best place for them to flourish in. So if they're a chemical company, it might be Aberdeen. It's unlikely to be Shoreditch, but they might have heard about it from there. So I think it's to make it really efficient for them to find the best place for them, the best talent pool, so that they'll thrive the best. And again, because of the wonderful history that we have in the UK, depending on which industry sector, it's right to, sometimes it's right to go to Bath, Bristol, sometimes it's Sheffield, sometimes it's, Manchester. It just depends. But making it easy for them to find which place on this quite small island to go is the key. Because we should think about translating ourselves to make it easier to access us. And maps help that, networks, relationships, they all help. And convening and yelling from the rooftops about, oh, that's you need to go over there.
Yeah.
They're great at that there. And, you should talk to X and Y and Z. And I can see from LinkedIn, you're connected to them already, so just make sure you chat to them. Yeah. And that makes it easier for everybody to do business. And at the end of the day, we just want to do business faster and easier than before.
Thank you both. Let's hear now from a man who has put these mysterious clusters on the map for the first time, James Clark.
So the BVCA, obviously, we're a British venture capital association, so we have a national remit, and around 2012, I started working with a brief of writing something about the other stuff that's happening around the country, so there wasn't too much focus on Tech City, because you have to understand, we have national members, and they could see everything that was happening locally, and there was a story to be told there. So from the start, I thought, well, I'll put a map together, that'll be easy. Gratified to see that it's taking you guys significantly longer. And so I quickly settled on focusing on talking about clusters we don't normally talk about, because they can teach us different things about the state of technology in the UK and the state of how these clusters develop. So I ended up picking 5 of them because they tell that story, and they tell sort of some of the key sort of defining factors of clusters. Firstly, what is a cluster? It can be quite difficult to define that, and so I turned to Michael Porter to try and help me define that one there. But also, clusters, like products and like anything else, go through a life cycle. So again, using a model to understand the life cycle of a cluster is quite important because, governments can't actually will a cluster into existence. By God, they can kill them. So it's important to understand what are the policy inputs you need to make at a particular point in a cluster's life cycle to best be able to support them. And then, of course, the last part was sort of trying to get inside the head of the cluster to understand what the dynamics of it are. And so I used this sort of 3-part model to try and analyse a handful of clusters to see what I could learn. So the places I picked, I didn't necessarily put them on the map. You're being too generous there. They did exist. It's just that sometimes they got forgotten. So I looked at Aberdeen because there's a thriving oil and gas technology cluster, and it's, sometimes it's forgotten that oil and gas is actually extremely technological. It's not great big holes in the ground with dirty black stuff coming out. It's the technology you need to be able to map the sea floor, the technology you need to be able to explore and drill. It's taking the hardware off a floating offshore oil rig and putting it to the bottom of the sea floor 1,500 metres down. All of these take extraordinary technological capability. And that's something that the cluster around Aberdeen has been working on in conjunction with the universities of Scotland and around the country for the last 40 years. So that particular cluster had something to teach us, which is actually, look, if we want to find a fast-moving, great investment environment, place where there's huge amounts of technology and has an international renown, we actually have one up there in the north of Scotland. And it's something that we can quite easily forget because it's quite a long way from Westminster to get to Aberdeen. So that particular part of clusters aren't necessarily where you expect them to be. The second place I looked at was obviously Cambridge. I mean, you cannot miss that Cambridge is probably the longest living and the highest technology cluster we have in this country, and frankly, it's probably more technologically capable than Silicon Valley if you look at the breadth of different areas it looks at, everything from materials science through to ICT, through to chemicals, through to all different sorts of things. But it's important to understand how Cambridge got going because it took an awfully long time because it started in the 1960s and in many cases was trying to grow at the sort of in direct opposition to what the local government wanted. And it was the persistence of a local community of entrepreneurs and academics that actually eventually got Cambridge to where it was. So that key fact that, so if Aberdeen is about they're not always where we expect them to be, Cambridge told us, well, actually it takes a huge amount of grassroots work by business and sort of academia to make these places work. And that sometimes government can be a huge hindrance to getting those things going. The third place I looked at was Manchester. Now, Manchester's a really interesting place because, firstly, it's got the biggest university in the country, and secondly, it has a huge biotechnology focus. But the thing about Manchester is it's taken a huge amount of government investment over the last 15 years or so, but it's now just starting to get its business network working. So you can have all the investment you want in the world, but if the business network isn't actually working, if the academics don't mix with the business people, it takes a while to get going. So I think it's going to be interesting to see what Manchester is capable of doing in the next few years because there's a huge amount of potential there to back up the government investment. The fourth place I looked at was Bristol. And Bristol's a really interesting one because most people forget this, but it's actually the highest, it's sort of the largest semiconductor industry in Europe. It's very easily forgotten, and the fantastic thing that's sort of nicely contradictory about Bristol is it got started precisely because it was sort of in the middle of nowhere when it came to semiconductors. A bunch of guys who'd set up semiconductor businesses in the United States came to the UK, looked around and thought, okay, let's set up in Bristol because it's got great access to universities and to transport, but nobody else is doing the sort of thing we're doing. So we're going to be able to hold on to the people we want to employ. And through various different means and methods, Bristol survived and thrived because it developed a hugely entrepreneurial culture. I mean, it's extremely inspiring to speak to people from the Bristol cluster because there's so much knowledge and so much entrepreneurship and such a fast flow of human capital that moves through the universities into businesses. The other thing that's great about Bristol is, obviously semiconductors is a hugely technically difficult sort of industry to succeed in. But during the 80s, it's very easy to forget that actually semiconductor industry out of Bristol was on par with that of the United States and possibly more advanced. It's just the technology went in a slightly different direction, and the sort of stuff that was being done at Bristol was actually, it became sort of the less adopted thing. It became the Betamax of the semiconductor industry. But at the same time, all that information is latent. You still have entrepreneurship. You still have knowledge networks. You still have a huge flow of sort of human talent through the industries. But semiconductors are extraordinarily expensive to get up and running. And so part of the problem is these entrepreneurial businesses get started, they get going, they develop a product, they don't manage to succeed in getting funding, and they break down. And you have this sort of entrepreneurial entropy happening where businesses break down into smaller constituent parts and then start all over again. And the last place I looked at, as Eddie mentioned, is the Formula One cluster. Now, the thing that's interesting about Formula One is we forget about it, even though we're extraordinarily good at it. And the reason we forget about it is because it's not necessarily the business we think about. In this particular case, success in this business is winning on the track. Now, we remembered what this sort of feeling felt like during the Olympics, but the Formula One cluster has been doing this for the last 50 years. But it's interesting to understand what we can learn from the Formula One cluster because it got going after the Second World War in an environment where the UK was rich in two things and quite poor in other ones. Well, firstly, it was rich in airfields, which happened to be nice flat tracks you can drive around. And secondly, it was full of engineers who knew exactly how to get the very best out of the mechanics and the machinery of fighter aircraft, because those are the things we built. Now, if you bolt a fighter aircraft engine into a car, it starts to become quite interesting. But obviously, they're at stock instruments. So how do you get advantage on a track when everybody has the same engine? So British engineers focused on chassis, they focused on aerodynamics, they focused on all the things that actually help you get it around a track faster. And because we have very flat airfields, they tend to be the great places to do test beds on handling of cars. Now, if you compare that to somewhere like Ferrari was basically an engine with a few wheels attached. And it was a very fast thing, but it was not the best handling of instruments. The thing that's interesting about Formula One is it's not a cluster. Or at least it wasn't when it started. You had teams based all around the country near their local airfield, and it wasn't the sort of cluster we talk about where guys get together over a beer at a pub or people talk around the office cooler. These were distributed all around the country. But the thing that mattered was that every couple of weekends they got together and then they raced. And it was very clear to see which one had done better in the preceding few weeks because they beat the pants off everybody else going around the track. And so you take innovations like the introduction of the front wing of the Formula One cars. One team introduced them, and within about 3 or 4 weeks, every team had them because it became very clear that point of meaningful interaction that is actually discussed in Eddie's paper, the point of meaningful interaction of this cluster was on race weekend to see who won on the track. Now, clusters don't necessarily need to be co-located, they just need a point of meaningful interaction. And that's the sort of thing we learn from understanding what happened in the Formula One cluster. Success doesn't necessarily mean you're successful in business. Success comes in many forms, and in this particular case, it came on the track, and it doesn't necessarily mean you have to be co-located. It just means there is a point at which you actually get together and everybody competes against each other. And there are many different ways our industries do that. So Tech Country became the report that sort of taught us all these sorts of things, and it's quite professionally gratifying to see that Silicon Cities has picked up the torch and carried it forward, and hopefully there will be some policy initiatives that come out of it, because I think it's an excellent report, and so congratulations to you guys.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, James. And on to a second James, but by no means second in... Where am I going with this? I don't know. Anyway, James Waterworth, giving us the European perspective. James, over to you.
And I'm going to be, if this microphone works, I'm going to be deliberately contrary, which were the instructions from the moderator, and sit down, seeing as everyone else stood up.
So lucky.
I have to disagree that way because I'm actually surprised how much I'm agreeing with everybody. And the surprise starts from a couple of things. When we first began discussing this excellent work that Policy Exchange has done, they, of course, Eddie was very focused on looking at regional clusters outside of London within the United Kingdom. Given I live and work in Brussels, and we're an association that has offices in Brussels and Washington, D.C., and we represent internet companies, I tend to look at things in a more macro international picture. So I kept saying to Eddie, come on, let's look at the international dimension. The interconnectedness is extremely important. And I often find when I'm in panel debates in London or Paris or Berlin that people are very domestically focused, and I think, come on, let's look at the international picture. But actually, everyone here has already referred to the international picture, including Ed Vaizey, which is extremely reassuring that we are thinking about the relevance of these policy messages, not just in terms of how you stimulate and develop tech clusters to other parts of, let's start with Europe, but indeed, why not other parts of the world. We all know there are a number of tech clusters in second-tier cities or in capital cities around the European Union. We all know that stimulating growth throughout the European Union is extremely good for other countries and extremely good for us. And one of the reasons it's extremely good for us is indeed this interconnectedness. So whether it's a cluster in Salford or Bristol or Poland or Finland, the number of those businesses who rely on capital city talent, so who rely on businesses such as law, finance, accounting, marketing, who rely on those businesses who are based in London, is extraordinary. So the interconnectedness between those businesses who may be in second-tier cities and what's going on in the capital city, whether they're British or whether they're Estonian or wherever they're from, is extraordinary and valuable for everybody. And one of the points I want to make about the wider international picture is to hit you with a couple of figures about how broad-based the talent across Europe is, and we could tell a much bigger story across the world, of course. And I was looking at some figures last week which were quite surprising to me, and hopefully will be to all of you in the audience as well, which is around the world, I don't know if anyone wants to hazard a guess, how many countries are there around the world that have been the host to an internet company that has grown to a valuation of more than $1 billion? Anyone want to give it a guess? How many countries there are?
8. Any advance on 10? Start betting at 10?
Advance on 10? Start betting at 10? Well, thank you for trying. The answer is 29.
Okay, that's cheating.
And the second and interesting part of this is we tend to think, that doesn't tell you how many have come from each country, just at least one, and that it was at least worth $1 billion. The second interesting part is how many of those 29 are European countries, Europe including Russia. Anyone want to have a guess at the second part? 28. Not 28, unfortunately. That would be even better. The answer is 15. 15. More than half of the countries in the world that have played host to $1 billion internet company are European, which is stunning when we think now we should not neglect the fact that China and the US have played host to many more and much bigger internet success stories. So this is not something that we can rest on and say we've done our work. There is clearly a long way still to go, but there is raw talent there and ideas which are put into effect, and this is across a broad number of ecosystems across Europe, and we could name many of them. And so I just want to remind everyone here of a couple of things, and happily we've had quite a positive discussion about the digital single market, but let me remind people of a couple of things. Firstly, the UK's balance of trade is a surplus in services. We, of course, have a trade deficit overall, certainly a trade deficit when it comes to products. In services of all types, but very much including technology services such as software, we have a considerable surplus. So let's not forget that. So the rules under which we export our services are extremely important to that. 47% of our exports go to the European single market. So if we want to keep having a vibrant services export sector, or indeed any export sector, we need that market to have the rules that we like it having. If we disengage, which is unfortunately what has happened for the last couple of years, that the UK has exited stage left and people are not taking it seriously because we're not taking it seriously, then it just means that we give a chance to other people to write the rules. And we might find we don't like those rules so much. They're not as conducive to the rules we need. So it was extremely positive to hear Ed Vaizey talk about, for example, the data protection regulation, which is in the closing stages, and to reference it as potentially the single most important economic piece of legislation which is going on at the moment. And indeed, it is extremely important. It's extremely important for citizens. It's also extremely important for the future of all types of businesses, whether they're technology or indeed many other types of businesses. So I think I would conclude there, just on that note, a positive note that we can all do it, but the UK's role in pushing the positive picture about this and pushing for the right rules such that these companies can grow is absolutely indispensable.
Thank you very much. So, ladies and gentlemen, plenty of food for thought. Do we have any questions to put to our panel? We have a few minutes. Yes, gentleman at the front. Oh, so just wait for a microphone just coming. No.
Chris Belk, Chairman of the Conservative Transport Group. Listening to what everybody's been saying, I think we should draw a distinction between the innovation creation process and the innovation nurturing process. They seem to me to be different. I'll just briefly read 2 short paragraphs from a report that I wrote, because that will save time. In summary, economic growth per capita is fundamentally dependent on innovation and the associated productivity gain. And innovation is all about ideas and information flows between people and how easily they can access ideas and opportunity. As Matt Ridley, author of The Rational Optimist, succinctly puts it, the meeting and mating of ideas begets innovation. This process happens naturally in cities, hence the attractions of the cities world over, and the bigger the city and the better the transportation connectivity within and around it, the more people are likely to come in contact with other people. The more contacts, the more ideas, exchanges, and the more innovation creating opportunities. Hence, London's economic success, very big city with fabulous metro transportation connectivity. I would add to that, the other thing that gets this contacting and innovation stimulating thing is the provision of housing.
So what's your question then behind this?
Does the panel agree?
Right. I will. Anyone want to jump in on housing, transport, the importance of cities as these centres of innovation?
I'll have a go. I think there can be some difficulty in focusing only on cities, and I'll give you an example. So over the last few years, an organisation called the Startup Genome developed a report that talked about the importance of sort of agglomerations of people and how they can be more like Silicon Valley. And it's a really interesting report, and it focused on a lot of the different factors that help create these sorts of environment. But the problem was it focused only on cities. Now, for some reason, look, I'm from Sydney, and Sydney's a wonderful place, and Melbourne's a wonderful place too. Sydney and Melbourne both arrived in the top 20, and somehow Cambridge was excluded. And it doesn't make an awful lot of sense to me that, trust me, Cambridge is quite a bit more innovative and quite a bit more capable than both Sydney and Melbourne put together. But by focusing solely on cities, you can actually miss out what happens in villages and towns where the culture of those places and I guess the intellectual capacity of those places drives the sorts of innovation that you're talking about. And I'll give you another example. Let's be honest, the public transportation in and around San Francisco and Silicon Valley is pretty dire. Yet it's one of the most innovative places in the world because there is a culture around those places that forces people together and gets them to communicate with each other. So I agree with you, there are benefits that come from being part of cities, but at the same time, transportation is not the sole thing that makes it happen. There is an actual deeper cultural element that allows those sorts of things to happen.
The role of housing?
Sorry?
The role of housing, because whether it's a small city or a small town.
I can't speak to that one, I'm afraid.
I think this is an issue we certainly see in Cambridge, where the nature of the debate almost is a victim of its own success, but plus a green belt is putting pressure on housing and house prices in Cambridge approximating those, or not too far behind London. So that's certainly another area of work that the housing team at Policy Exchange will be looking at. So look out for reports on exactly that subject. Yes, lady at the front.
Kay Hutchison, Bell Media, and TLA Tech London Advocates working group on health tech. I'm obviously a Scot, but I've been in London most of my life. But I've just done a project for the Technology Strategy Board up in Scotland, and it seemed to me very important to recognise that, you know, if you are actually trying to encourage other clusters around the country, you have to give them real ownership and involvement. And that's not only in the project itself, but it's also in the financial support and financing. And obviously, my experience up there has been that people have contacts, they have knowledge, they have skills, but they don't often have a huge amount of money to invest. There might be some really good investors, but they might all want to just put in 10k because the kind of risk thing that you get in London is just completely off the scale compared to locally. So my question is, how do you make it work financially for more local places, whether it's cities in Scotland or Ireland or towns more locally?
Who wants to take that one?
Let's go for Sherry.
Not really, but I think I'll have a go. I think the devolution of powers and the ability to sort of raise finance is important. And I think you were talking about a little bit earlier, Jared, the clusters or cities or innovation happen around where there are relationships and where people want to make it happen local to them. So I think it is really important, the local element of it. And if a locality is really interested in its economic development and its long-term health, then having the ability to influence that is really important. How you go about that is probably another policy paper coming from you guys.
Don't put me on the spot, but it may be.
But I think you look at some of the city deals, which I think have spoken to that point. And I think of, in Cambridge, our little, you were talking about earlier, or was it you? It was made to work despite what the local government wanted, and very much despite. It was the local ecosystem, the business people coming together, and with the university actually, to try to make it happen. And that was the will, and it would have been better if they could have raised finance. Almost certainly, I'm sure that's the case. Controlling one's own fate is something that's very near and dear to my heart. But I'm definitely not a politician, and I have no idea how many political toes I just stepped on by making those statements. But I can see the reason for wanting to control your own fate and to devolve certain powers down to that level.
Were you wanting to add something, Jared?
Yeah, just to say that there's clearly public money. If there's a need coming strongly from the community that there's an asset that needs to be accelerated in its development, then there's public money, right? We all know that. There's also private sector money, angels and angel networks to help seed capital. And clearly, most of you probably are familiar with the Seed Enterprise Investment Scheme that gives tax relief on early stage investment. But number 3, which is something that I have been very vocal on when visiting local councils in Leeds, Sheffield, and Manchester in particular, as well as Newcastle, is another source of revenue for small companies has been the procurement process of local councils. They clearly have a role to play because they're obviously buying local services, but they also need to find a way of, innovating. So how do you invest money in trials to test new technologies that may make your council work more efficiently? And I'm getting to the point about industrial internet, which is obviously a very transformative technology, but it's very linked to what you're saying. Is like, how can you make more finance available? And procurement is one of the key areas that helps digital businesses get access to customers so that they continue to grow and create local jobs. So, it'd be great to see local councils being a little bit, even more innovative in the way that they're sort of ensuring that their local companies are given the opportunity to bid for tenders that may be sometimes outside the box. So I think that's something that I would like to see more of.
Final questions. We take them in one go, and then I'll ask, conscious of time, so I'll ask our panellists to sum up their remarks. Lady right at the back.
My name is Valerie Mocker, and I work for Nesta. So my question is the following. I absolutely agree that we should identify and champion different clusters, but what can we do to avoid that we are just listening to those that are already shouting out and that are already hustling for themselves? So I think Cambridge did an amazing job at not just talking about what's happening there, but also generating data in terms of reports and maps that other people can look at and can pick up what's happening there. But there are quite a few unsung heroes, as they're referred to in Europe. And Munich is one example. Everybody's looking at Berlin. In Munich, there's a lot of stuff happening, especially when you look beyond digital. Telefonica decided to put its Wire accelerator in Germany to Munich and not to Berlin. And when you talk to the people in the kind of city councils and angel investors and so on and so forth, they often say we don't really know what to do to create our voice. And Oxford has a similar problem. When I talked to somebody there recently, they said, well, we would need an Oxford Cherry Cooter or an Oxford Herman Hauser who go and who talk on our behalf. But if you don't have an Oxford Cherry or an Oxford Herman, what can you do? What can you do to create a voice if you are a cluster who is trying to be, a leading entrepreneurial hub?
Shall I take that one?
Go for it. So just before we do any other questions, just very quickly, or we'll finish on that one. Okay, so Sherry? final?
I would argue that Munich and Oxford have their Sherry Coutus and Hermann Hausers, and that they can be found. I mean, one of the, again, when I started, I mentioned there's the Founders for Schools. That lists 8,000 businesses that are growing 30, 40, 50% a year, and they are all over the UK. So every single town and city has its business leaders that are leading innovative companies that are growing. And it would do all of us a great benefit, be we a university or a school or a local enterprise partnership, to recognize those heroes that are all around us, creating businesses that are driving our economies forward. So I think we look outside our sandbox too often, and there are great businesses here. You talked about the 28 internet countries, which is interesting. You spoke about the F1, the F1. They are all around us, and I think using data and information to bring up to the surface so that we can promote and yell from the rooftops and point out what is there to allow other people from afar to discover us is a really important thing. There are jewels all over here, and it's just that we maybe don't know about them. And once we discover them, I think that's a key role. Once you can, and again, one of the things that I admire about Tech City is the first thing you did is you put together a map because you wanted to know where those companies were happening. And then after that, it's, which ones are growing fastest? Okay, well, that's where that is. And you allowed the system and the customers who were ordering the products of these fast-growing companies to be the arbiters. So what are the companies we should know about? Well, who's acquiring the best customers fastest? And we should know about that. And it's a very dynamic picture, and you can really only doing that using modern technology. But it's all around us, and I think I would love to see better data made available faster so that we could all enjoy having a fuller picture of our dynamic economy as it emerges around us.
In no more than 20 seconds, final summing up point, Jared.
To that point, watch this space, I guess. We're very much aware of that, and Ed alluded to that, which is hopefully going to be published next month.
James, one final ask for government, or
to actually that point. Look, we all need to identify where these places are. It's just incredibly hard. If you took Companies House data and tried to map technology businesses, you would find 6,000 of them on Trafalgar Square alone. So there's data there. It's just about sorting through the data to find the right information so it can be as useful as possible.
Any final remarks, Sherry? Or?
Watch this space.
Watch this space. That seems to be a general theme here. And James?
And I think being open and altruistic, I completely agree about gathering the data. And even, for example, even if you have responsibility for Tech City, looking beyond that is ultimately going to produce more welfare. And again, I would just make the point that the UK is very much, and the European continent, leading in terms of gathering this form of data, understanding the relevance of it, and we should evangelise the fact that this can and is being done, and it'll help our partners, which will come back to help us in the end.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. You are the hardcore, those of you who stayed the whole way through. Can we please give a final round of applause to James, Sherry, James and Jared?